embrace this desire for competence in understanding ourselves, and then give weight to your anger. Because if you're feeling angry, it's probably for good cause, right? We're dismissed as irrational, we're silenced as whiny, like all the different things that happen. But in fact, we feel angry for a reason, and that reason is often deeply social. It's the anger of relationships and communication, because in essence, you're saying, I need something I don't have, and I'm counting on the people around me, my family, my workplace, my polity, my government, my society, to care for me, right? It's like, care for me, and I'm telling you what I need. Why don't we want to know what women need?
Women's anger has long been suppressed, denied, belittled. Now, the anger of men is allowed more expression. It gets more validity. So what happens when we consider women's anger in a different light? Anger as an emotion that can be channeled for personal growth. Anger as a catalyst for societal change. I'm Jen Cannell, and this is Dear Beth, a Women in Law podcast. And yes, this is our last episode of this season. No better way, I'd say, to celebrate and go out with a bang than with one incredible guest. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by author Soraya Chemaly. Now, she'll speak to us about her provocative, it's a highly acclaimed book. It's called Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. And we'll also be looking back at some of our favorite moments on the podcast this past season. So joining us once again here in the studios, the co-editors of the collection of personal letters that we have based this whole podcast on, Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law. Brea Lowenberger, Leah Howie, Beth Bilson. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Hi. Hi, Jen.
Hello. Okay, it's our last episode for real. Were you ready for this?
No, really hoping for season 2.
I just feel like it's been a long time, but it's been a really good ride. Like so many cool people that I've met thanks to you and thanks to this podcast. So yeah, we'll be revisiting some of the highlights. But first, Brea, Leah, I know the two of you recently had this opportunity to interview Soraya Chemaly. Leah, how did that all go down?
Well, Soraya is the author of a book, like you mentioned, Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. I read this book probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and it was hugely influential to me personally. I take screenshots of her book and I send it to people that I like, and I just thought, if we could get her on this podcast, how amazing would that be? So I sent her a message on Twitter and said, basically, I'm a big fan of your work. I'd love to talk to you on this podcast. Would you be interested in coming on? And she said yes. And that's what we did. I was delighted. I was extremely ecstatic the day that she said yes.
Okay, where were you in all of this?
Across the hall. Leah going, should I DM her? And I'm like, why not shoot your shot?
So you literally slid into her DMs.
I did. Yep. And so I guess without further ado, here's our conversation with Soraya. Hi, Soraya. We're so excited that you're here today. I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Dear Beth podcast. And like I mentioned in that Twitter message that I sent you, your book, Rage Becomes Her, is a definitive kind of guide and resource for myself and for so many of my friends and colleagues in law and in my personal life. I think I go to Goodreads and screenshot quotes from yours at least once a week and send them.
My God. Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad it's helpful.
It's so helpful. Like I don't have a Bible, but if I did, your book would actually be it. So thank you so much for coming today.
Oh my gosh, well, you just made my whole week. Thank you. Writing is a lonely thing, so it's nice to hear.
Oh, well, you're making our whole weeks by being on this podcast too, so thank you. So my first question for you today is, and your book touches on this, but I'd like to hear what you'd say today. Why do you think we look at anger, particularly the anger of women, in such a negative light?
Well, I mean, I think, as you said, it's not that we look at all anger in a negative light. It's just often the case that we want to suppress certain people's anger, but give expression to other people's anger. And what I argue in the book is that that's really a reflection of societal values and distributions of power. So the example that I use is that in many contexts, when men express anger, people's trust in them grows and they're able to convince people of their perspectives, for example. And in those exact same contexts, if, for example, a woman says and does the same things in the same way, the opposite happens. And that's mainly because of stereotypes. Ultimately, it's because anger at a man confirms our ideas about masculinity and leadership. So we don't have an unease, we don't feel distrust. But anger in a woman, again, because of the same types of segregated stereotypes, leads us to think, wait, there's some cognitive dissonance here. Surely this isn't right. And that then cascades into other forms of distrust.
And then kind of touching on that in your book, and one of the passages that I share quite a bit is lots of stuff from your conclusion. And some of the material in the conclusion is you kind of say it's time that women embrace our anger, and that it can actually lead us to personal and then also societal change. Can you expound on that, or how do you think that will happen?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people, if they don't read the book, this oversimplified impression might be that I want all girls and women and femme-identifying people to rage, which is clearly not the case. What I'm saying at the end of the book is all of us, regardless of our identities, have these emotions for a reason. Anger in particular is a very powerful survival emotion, right? Because it warns us about threat or injustice, and it's the emotion of self-defense. And so what I urge people to think about is not so much embracing their anger as developing emotional competence, recognizing their emotions, listening to what their emotions have to tell them, valuing the knowledge that comes to them in their emotional lives, and then acting on that knowledge. And so as opposed to saying maybe embrace your anger, I would first say embrace this desire for competence in understanding ourselves, and then give weight to your anger, because if you're feeling angry, it's probably for good cause, right? Like we're dismissed as irrational, we're silenced as whiny, like all the different things that happen. But in fact, we feel angry for a reason, and that reason is often deeply social. It's the anger of relationships and communication, because in essence, you're saying, I need something I don't have, and I'm counting on the people around me, my family, my workplace, my polity, my government, my society, to care for me, right? It's like, care for me, and I'm telling you what I need. And so the question I really wanted to ask was, why don't we want to know what women need? Why are we so invested as a society in the socialization of young children, in segregating these emotions and denying this to girls, and denying, for example, conversely, sadness or anxiety or fear in boys?
So, what is your favorite example of how women's rage actually resulted in social change?
I think it's really what is my least favorite example. I mean, I really can't think of many social change movements, particularly we have a lot of recorded history in the last 200 years of revolutions, of change, of social activism, and over and over again, women, driven by their sense of injustice and anger, are participants, very visible, loud, vocal participants, and often leaders in social change movements. But as history is written, those women are made invisible and they disappear. And so we're always shocked when we learn later, through some process of awakening, feminist awakening, new media, a change in education systems or social perspectives, we're always shocked that women were participating. But in fact, I really can't think of one movement where women were not trying to participate or actively participating. So if you look, for example, at the Haitian Revolution, right, the first successful revolution of its kind, the first liberation of enslaved people by enslaved people, women were front and center in that revolution, and yet we don't know their names. We barely know the men's names for a whole variety of other reasons, which we could get into. But you look at any revolution, and that's basically true. And so in the 20th century, if you think, for example, of the United States and post-1964 conservative backlash and retrenchment into white supremacy, women in schools, women in cities, women in communities led the fight to erect Confederate statues, to take over school boards, to fight against sexual liberation. And yet we don't want to talk about that kind of anger, right? But I think, you just scratch the surface of any social movement and you'll find women and they're angry.
Our podcast is, it's aimed at women lawyers, and a lot of our listeners are young students, so young women. And Brea and I both teach, and I spend a lot of time actually with women. And these are women in law school too. So these are women who are looking to affect social change and have a career where they have an impact. So what kind of advice would you give them starting out their careers, thinking about how to develop the emotional intelligence that you referred to, or just how to be effective in what they're trying to do, operating within the world that we live in?
So I'm going to say some things, and I would really love your opinions, and maybe we have a conversation, because I don't teach law, right? And you do, and you're with these students. But there are a couple of things that really come to mind. One is that I think a lot of girls and women gravitate towards the law because, as you said, they want to make positive change, and they have a sense of justice. So one of the hardest things to come to terms with, I think, as a woman, is that many of the systems that we are encouraged and rewarded for participating in actually separate justice from the law. Because we know that so many of the normative standards of law are not based on women's experiences of violence or women's social needs or even women's changing status. And so for me, the question is, how far can the law take us? How committed are we to either reform or radical change? And what roles are there for women lawyers that go beyond some of the more traditional roles that would, in fact, perhaps double down on some of the more problematic biases in the law? Does that make sense to you as teachers?
Yes, yeah, very much so. It's interesting, like when I read like some of your quotes, and especially from like towards the end of your book, you use so many words when you're describing anger that are words that I identify with the law and being lawyers and with law students. And so I've always found your book really interesting from that perspective too, which not just from a woman's perspective, but as someone who works in these fields. I think a lot of the ways you describe anger are so apt to the practice of law and using law as a means to affect change.
Well, I think I'm not a lawyer, but I am a former Catholic girl. And I mention this because I think that I had a very early sense as a young girl of the betrayal of an institution. And I often feel that way about the law in terms of trying to affect social change and equality and equity and justice in a society, right? Because if you believe in a just world, if you think I can make a difference and we have a society that has laws for a reason, initially you're like, we're all protected. And we're taught, like I didn't grow up in the United States, I grew up in the Bahamas in a Commonwealth country. So different sets of laws and different culture, everything like that. But if you're taught that in essence the world is just and there are laws and there are ways that the society governs itself, and then you realize that, in fact, those laws and ways are not necessarily just. I think that can be a really rude awakening. And in my experience, I've met a lot of lawyers, particularly women lawyers, who go into the law as true believers. And depending on the professors they take, the laws they study, their critical approach, they can retain that sense of being true believers, or they can go through the disillusionment of deconstruction, et cetera, and come out on the other side with a different orientation. And I haven't been to law school, but I've spent a lot of time in law schools and with lawyers, and I'm just really struck in the end by how random that exposure can seem in a law school. It just kind of depends on who your professors are, what you gravitate towards, and how central or marginalized different approaches can be in an institution. Is that true where you teach?
I would think very much so. And it's interesting, the kind of deconstruction that you just spoke of. I think that definitely happens for some of our students. And there's actually links between that kind of disillusionment and some of the mental health and well-being issues that we're seeing in law school, right? Like
That's
that disillusionment
interesting. How would you categorize that? Like, how would you describe that?
Well, what I've read is that, if students come to law school for the purpose of going to law school so they can affect change, and I'm going to use the word social justice warrior, and I don't mean that in a disparaging kind of way. I mean, there's lots of students who come to law school with that intention and that purpose. And you come to law school and you're confronted with cases from the 1800s written by like the UK House of Lords, which at that time was, of course, all men. And that's all you're learning. That can be very shocking is not the right word, disorienting, I think, for our students. Yeah, and you're like, what am I doing here? And this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So it's definitely a struggle, and we see it in our students, definitely. Brea, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you described, Leah, resonates with my own research as well, that by the time students finish law school, they're actually worse off when it comes to their orientation to social justice and improving access to justice.
What do you mean by worse off? What does that look like?
There's been studies that have been done that actually show that students' orientation to improving access to justice and social justice issues, the disorienting aspects of law school have kind of beaten those interests down, so to speak.
Is there a sense that comes from a kind of sense of the pyrrhic nature of things, or exhaustion, or disillusionment, or is it, oh, this is good enough, we just have to work within these parameters? Like, is there a way in which you mainly see that manifesting?
It's a good question. Leah, given your interaction with so many first-year students, do you have any direct kind of observations of that?
I think it varies. I think for some, we can't not acknowledge the significant debt load that many of them are leaving law schools with. And that obviously has a huge impact on what you're going to do when you graduate law school. Like when I went to law school, didn't seem that long ago. It was in 2005 to 2008. I think my tuition was around $7,000. And now it's well over 20, I think, a year. And that's probably a relatively inexpensive law degree in North America. So that has a huge impact. I think there's a lot of pressure in law school to work with the big corporate law firms, and that seems to be the easiest path and the path that everyone is doing. So some of it might just be going with everyone else, doing what everyone else seems to be doing, and is kind of getting caught up. And I think a lot of lawyers, actually, we had someone on our first episode kind of talk about her path in law was very much the traditional, I'm going to article, work for this big law firm. And then when she was around 30, she kind of had a reawakening where she thought, hang on a second, this isn't at all what I wanted to do. So for some people too, it's maybe just an age thing, and there's a difference. You're different when you're 22 than 32 and 42, and you make different choices and you see things differently. So I think a lot of people might find their way back to what they originally started to do. It's just that can take a while, I think. And emotional intelligence, or that sense of anger and other things that you talk about in your book, I think can be a part of that too.
Yeah. So we are ecstatic to hear that you have a new book coming out this spring. Yes, as we understand, called The Resilience Myth, New Thinking on Grit, Strength, and Growth After Trauma. Without giving out too many spoilers, what would you say is the key message you hope readers will take away from the message of that book?
So I think in this book, I'm really trying to describe and articulate a paradigm shift away from individualized notions of resilience that are focused on what I think of as kind of toxic strength, unreasonable expectations of grit that are ultimately harmful, and a kind, honestly, of hyper-masculine image of what constitutes strength. So that instead, we shift to an idea of resilience in which we center our interconnectedness, our need for mutual care, our provision of mutual care, and the idea that we are more than just our internal lives, right? We are connected to other people. We are part of communities. And in terms of life itself, we are connected to all living things, not in a relationship of dominance and exploitation, but again, of mutual care. And so we need to think about resilience, not in terms of individual traits or strengths, but in terms of our capacity for connection with others.
I can't wait to read that, Soraya. It's interesting to think about some of those comments too, in light of issues that we've been talking about on the podcast on challenges or adversities that women can face in the legal profession, and there's a lot of focus again on this individual resilience, or even here's a yoga session at lunch.
Oh, it's absurd, right?
Right. Feel better without actually addressing the systemic issues, right? I can't wait to read it.
I mean, I think you live it every day, probably. It's true, like in the medical profession, teaching profession, nursing profession. They all are investing in these kind of self-help programs within institutions. And my starting point for this book was really in Rage itself, where I think I wrote something like, you can't self-help your way out of inequality or oppression or exhaustion. You have to help yourself when your society isn't supporting you, when it's not helping you. And yet that's what this particular ideology, it's really insidious, continues to encourage us to do.
Well, I think that's possibly all the time that we are able to spend today with you. I want to respect your time and thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I was just texting one of my friends and said, this is definitely a top 10 life highlight for me. This has been fantastic. So
That's so kind of you.
That was the interview Brea and Leah did with Soraya Chemaly, the author of Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. And she makes so many great points. And I'm just going to put it out there. I'd like to ask each of you in that interview what stood out for you about what she says. And Beth, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, I think one of the interesting points she makes is that although she is in favor of embracing anger as an emotion and recognizing it in yourself and accepting that anger is a legitimate emotion, she does say that you want to find a way to turn it to your advantage and not allow it to overpower you, not allow it to become a negative force for you or the people around you. And I think one of the things that it reminded me of is that anger often arises from a sense of injustice. It's a way of saying, this isn't fair. I have not been treated fairly. And I think that that's important in the context of the conversations we've been having, that anger as a way of expressing a sense of injustice can be important. And I think when we talk to some of our guests about allyship and their experiences with racism and homophobia and other discriminations, I think you can understand that for them, anger is a tool. It's a way of bringing attention to something that for them has been deeply hurtful and that they think is really unfair.
Yeah, that deep-seated feeling of this is not right, this is unfair. And it's funny how she said it comes from sort of that deep social cues, like that you're not getting something that you need from the people around you. What stood out for you, Brea?
Similar to Beth, that it's not so much about embracing anger, but developing emotional competence, embracing the desire for competence and understanding ourselves, and then giving weight to our anger to get away from suppressing it, getting curious and translating it into something good.
Yeah, it's funny. I wouldn't think of any of the guests we've had on the podcast as, irrational or whiny, but so often that is what we do with women's anger. What sat mostly in your heart after having talked to her, Leah?
Similar things, actually, that Beth and Brea just identified. Shockingly enough, we have some similar thoughts on things like this.
Who knew?
But her comments about just emotional awareness, like that Brea just talked about, I thought was the key takeaway. And that was my key takeaway from the book. When I was, 35, 36, that was kind of a transitioning point in my life for a variety of reasons. But reading her book and being able to say, that's why I'm feeling some of these things. I'm actually angry. That's actually what it is. I'm angry about some things. I'm not necessarily sad. I'm angry about some things. And what do I need to do to then make some changes? So for me, her big message around being, have the emotional awareness to recognize how you're feeling, and then don't be scared of it, and don't try and stifle it, and don't repress it. And it's okay to express anger too. And I parent my girls like that as well. I will say to them, like, Isabel or Veronica, it's okay that you're feeling angry right now. Like, what you choose to do next is up to you. How you choose to act on this anger, that might have some consequences. There might be some bad choices that are made there, but your feeling of anger is okay.
Well, and why is it that for almost all the years that we were growing up, it felt like when men would express anger, I was thinking about tennis here, and Serena Williams comes to mind, because remember when she took her racket and she like smashed it down on the court and she was yelling at like the officials. It was a scene, like it was a whole big thing. Male tennis players do that. Not a big deal. Like, why is there such a disparity in the way we see men's anger and women's anger?
Well, I come from a generation that's even more traditional, I think, than the one you probably grew up in. And I think part of it had to do with the expectations there have been historically of women, which is that they play a particular role, largely focused on family and the home.
Domesticity.
Domesticity and creating a pleasant environment for everybody, and that as a kind of quid pro quo for that, they're kind of protected by males, whether it's their parents or their brothers or their husbands. And the expectation is that they won't be kind of creating a disturbance.
Don't make a fuss.
That their role is to provide a kind of helpful and supportive and peaceful environment, not to kind of get in anybody's way. And I think men, on the other hand, there has been this image of men, successful men, as being aggressive and being able to express stronger kinds of emotions, whereas women, I think, traditionally have been expected to be quieter and certainly not to express anger, and possibly not even to feel it, because there's a sense that, they have a good life, that somebody is providing for them, and that they have nothing to be angry about.
Yeah. Yeah, well, but if you want to go centuries and centuries back, I mean, women were on the same level as, I don't know, like cattle and other family holdings. Like, you wouldn't expect them to get angry. Why are the things that you provide for angry at you? That does
a little nearer than his dog, a little dearer than his horse.
Right? And it's taking us a long time to break out of that. And I think that's why some people are so uncomfortable with women's anger. But it does sort of benefit, I'm just going to say it, a patriarchal society in general, to tell all, we just simmer down. We got this. You'll be fine. Or, you know what, as an individual, let's just go take a nice bubble bath. Like, go and self-help your way through this. But the standout line that Soraya brings us is that one about you can't self-help your way out of inequality, oppression, or exhaustion. What do you think about that point?
The point for me speaks to the essence of the podcast and my own personal involvement in it, which, has an access to justice orientation. That is, in order to maintain a legitimate profession, it needs to involve and employ the diversity of the public that it serves. And systemic changes are necessary in order to make this happen.
I'll let you pick up there too. Is there anything on that particular point? You can't self-help your way out of inequality?
Well, I think it speaks to broader changes that are needed in the profession and in society as a whole, right? And like I mentioned to Soraya when we were having that conversation, it's not really fair to say, here's a yoga session. Go do this.
Just do this lunch hour, like relaxation thing.
Right? Which will also then make you later to pick up your kids from daycare, and you can't bill for that time anyway, so it actually hurts you in the long run. And I think that's the fundamental point I'm assuming she's going to be making in her book. I'm looking forward to reading it, is that it's not fair, it's not just, it's not equitable to put the onus on people who are being oppressed by systems to somehow do an extra yoga session, be extra mindful, and fix their way out of it and climb their way out of it. It's not fair, and it's not actually going to work.
Oh, well, if you want out of there, it's up to you. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This worked so well for so many people.
I think that's right. I think it's also a kind of indicator of how individualistic our society has been, and the sort of assumptions we make that people are on their own and that they're responsible for the way their life goes, and that if there's something wrong with them, then it's their responsibility to figure out what that is and fix it. It's not a community responsibility, it's an individual responsibility. So I think that idea of the whole kind of mindfulness, yoga, self-care industry, although I'm sure it's helpful for some people, I think it is kind of aligned with that paradigm of people improving themselves and being responsible for their own fate.
But as their own little isolated individuals, not as people working together necessarily. I think that's the difference, right? Because I'm thinking about Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In, and that was all about, well, just pick up your socks and girl, wash your face, and like just do the things harder, just work harder. And that we know by now, if working harder got women ahead, like we would be ahead centuries ago. That's not the only key. And the new book, I should point out, it's called The Resilience Myth, New Thinking on Grit, Strength, and Growth After Trauma. And Soraya makes this point about we need to re-examine women's anger. We need to revisit our notions of what resilience really is and maybe what it's not. How would you say that point landed with you?
Yeah, she talked about the paradigm shift and the idea of a new resilience that's centered on interconnectedness, mutual care, and the idea that we're more than our internal lives. And again, this shifts the focus on the need for systemic changes.
I think that the notion of resilience that is kind of in common use today really goes back to that idea that people can sort of manage their own temperament and manage their own situation and manage their own way out of crises rather than requiring a community around them to provide them with support and to watch out for each other and to connect. I think there is a sort of social equity connection there because that whole notion of individual responsibility denies the reality for a lot of people that they simply can't. There are so many barriers in their lives that they can't get over them by themselves. They can't possibly succeed in the way that some of those descriptions of self-care and wellness and mindfulness and resilience suggest they can.
Well, the more I think about it, the more that's where sometimes that anger that you have, you don't even know really where it's from, but that almost nameless anger that you have, that like the systems around you are messed up and this is not how it's supposed to be. And you can't even put your finger necessarily on why, but that anger is still there. Anyway, we could go on and on about Soraya. We are so grateful that she took time out of her busy schedule to speak with us here at Dear Beth. That book, a must-read for all people, Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. Now, if you're looking for her newest book, that's the one called The Resilience Myth, New Thinking on Grit, Strength, and Growth After Trauma. Well, from one book to another, this podcast, of course, we based on the collection of personal essays you all co-edited, Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law. That book also influencing conversations about women in law. Now, have a listen to these perspectives.
My name is Dwight Newman. I'm a professor of law at the University of Saskatchewan. Early in the book, there's reference to the idea that stories are the way that we can talk about things and bring attention to things in a way that reaches across between people. I think it's also a way that really might bring statistics to life. We've all read about statistics about women in the legal profession, but here we have actual stories of women in the legal profession and what it's like to be there. So we're not just reading about what's the percent who drop out after how many years. We're reading about the struggles that some went through in persisting in the legal profession, or in some cases in moving on to other careers. But it's also a book about reflecting on creating a more inclusive legal profession. And I think in the process it can be about how we can all think about contributing to that, being allies with those that are confronting challenges in accessing that legal profession inclusively.
My name is Brock Melnick. I'm in my last year of law school here. I think it was just very interesting to see all the different perspectives from women from all different walks of life and different areas of life, and then just understanding their perspective a little bit better. I mean, I'll never fully be able to understand, but it's just nice to be able to try to put myself in their shoes. My partner, she's in the professional field as well and has dealt with many different aspects that are similar to this. She's not a legal professional, but in the accounting world. And so that wanted me to learn more, put myself in her shoes a little bit better. And secondly, I really value equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDIs. And so does the firm I'm going to. And so reading this book as a young male entering the law industry, it really helped me to put a grasp more on what are the potential issues that I may run into or things that I may not have noticed beforehand. I think these young males entering law school, some of them have had no work experience. And so they don't know what it's like out in the world. They've just came right from high school to undergrad, sometimes only with a 2-year undergrad into law school. So I think reading books like this book, Creating a Seat at the Table, is so pivotal for their transformation into who they should be as a legal professional. In that sense, it means that they need to understand that having strong EDI values and strong core values and principles as a lawyer in a law firm is beneficial. This is proven time and time again. Having different people from different walks of life help a law firm. It helps you as an individual grow throughout law school, but it also helps when you get out into the real world. Having just a bunch of me at a law firm is not a good thing. You don't want that. You want that open dialogue and that diversity.
That's Brock Melnick. He's in his final year at law school right now at the University of Saskatchewan. And before him, of course, that was the voice of Dwight Newman, a law professor here at the U of S. I'm just going to go around the table here. What does it mean to you to hear them praising this book so much?
To me, it means quite a lot. Dwight Newman taught me in my very first year of law school, and I was part of his very first class of students at law school. So we go back to 2005. I guess that's 19 years. He's definitely played a bit of a mentoring role, possibly a sponsoring role in my legal career too at times, and someone whose opinion I respect greatly. And Brock, on the other side of things, is someone that I work with as a student. And he's a teaching assistant for me in my first year legal research and writing program. So to hear their insight and their praise of the book, both from someone who's more senior in my role at the College of Law and someone who's a student at the College of Law. And I learn so much from both sets of people in my job. I learn a lot from the students and I learn a lot from my colleagues. So to hear from both of them meant a lot to me personally.
Now, I know Brock was like, look, you don't want a law firm full of a bunch of just me. I heard you giggling at that, right?
I was like, oh, I'm so hopeful hearing from Brock. Yeah, I really appreciated both Brock and Dwight reading the book and offering to share their insights. And so, as you're all aware, my graduate work focused on reflective practice in the legal profession being necessary for systemic change. So hearing Dwight's recognition of the benefit of this type of reflection, that's prompted through storytelling, and his invitation for pause on how we can all, take steps to improve the profession was very much appreciated.
Yes, I agree. I think that in our approach to this book, we did deviate from the usual academic approach to gathering information and articulating it and analyzing it and disseminating it. So it is, I have to say, nice to hear someone affirm that that is a useful approach to a project, is not to do the usual academic article with a lot of footnotes, but to actually focus on stories and storytelling and personal experience as a way of getting people to understand what's going on in the legal profession and in the justice system. So I think it was really wonderful. And the other thing, of course, is when you're involved in a book project, you become very absorbed in it, and it becomes a very kind of interior experience in some ways. And to hear that there actually are people reading it and enjoying it is very encouraging.
There are readers, real readers, and they're out there. And it's fun. Men might see this book on the shelf somewhere and they go, oh, experience, for women in law. Yeah, pass right on by. But by not even picking it up and flipping through it, what's the insight they might miss out on?
Well, I think it's always valuable to put yourself in someone else's shoes and to be able to understand other people's experiences in any capacity. But in a professional capacity, these are people you work with. These are people that you might work with opposing on the other side of the file. These are judges you might appear before. Men are working with women all the time in the profession. And it's probably a good thing to understand a little bit about right their perspectives and where they come from. So I think it's valuable and everyone should be reading it from that side of things. It's also interesting to think about in fiction, the male voice for so long was the predominant voice. Like we have all around this table read a lot of books written from a men's male perspective. Movies feature men talking the most. It's only in like recent 10, 20 years that women in movies and TV shows actually had complex personalities
and relationships outside
of men,
like the whole
right?
Bechdel test. Yeah.
Yes. So like there's some catch up to do, I think.
Right. What would you say?
Well, we're biased, but I think it's entirely valuable to folks outside of law as well as male identifying folks in law. I think what makes the book and what has made this podcast really interesting is that, yes, we've talked about issues specific to women, but there's, been a lot of different stories shared that, have to do with the legal profession and being in a profession that would be valuable and relevant to men in law as well as women and folks outside of law.
Beth, is this like a cheat book for men? Like you can get inside a woman's head more easily if you pick this book up and actually try reading it?
It is readable, as I say. There are no footnotes, so it's really, I think it really does kind of draw you in, and you can follow along. One of the most inspired mottos I think that anyone has come up with in recent years is from the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, which is "We are all treaty people," and I think that idea that you think of a relationship as being sort of one-sided, you think of it from your own point of view, and in the case of Indigenous people, you think of treaties as just being about Indigenous people, but it's also about the non-Indigenous community and the commitments that they've made. I think the same can be said about the value of having men understand this kind of narrative and the narratives of Indigenous people and the narratives of people with disabilities, is that I don't think that there are a lot of men who go into the legal profession with the intention of hurting other people or slowing them down or stopping their careers in their tracks. But that, in fact, has been the effect of a lot of the assumptions men have made, a lot of the systems they've set up, a lot of the ways they've practiced law. And I think that for them to try to understand that it doesn't look the same to everybody, that it's not having an equal effect on everybody, and that therefore you have a responsibility to gain some understanding of how it works for people who aren't you.
Yeah. Well, and I think of the motto even for the province of Saskatchewan, isn't it? From many people, strength. Well, if you're not drawing on all those people, you don't have the strength. That's just the way it works. And I feel like this really plays into what we talked about on the podcast about allyship and being an accomplice, even to the idea of being a sponsor, which Beth had sort of told us about earlier. Rachel Lowen Walker was the one who described being an accomplice, not just an ally, not just like standing next to the person, but helping them get things done. I like how you brought that even deeper, Beth, by saying, okay, how do I be a sponsor? How do I promote this person? How do I make sure I drop their name in meetings? And this is where I want to bring back yet another perspective that we heard earlier in the season. Have a listen.
My name is Safwan Javed. I am the drummer in a band called Wide Mouth Mason, and I am an entertainment lawyer who is a partner at the firm Taylor, Obala, Murray, Leyland in Toronto. I think it's critical for anyone who is in a position of privilege, whatever the source of that privilege, whether that's sex, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, whatever the source of that privilege is, I think it's critical and incumbent upon you to be an ally to those who don't have that privilege. And sometimes that can work in sort of cross currents where you may have a privilege in an area and another person may have a privilege in another area, and between the two of you working together, you provide a more level playing field for specifically marginalized people, or really for everyone and for each other. So if I use the example of myself, I'm a straight male who comes from comfortable economic background, but I'm also a person of color. And so what can I use from the privilege part of my existence to help others in other situations and support others who don't have that privilege? And also in doing so, am I creating an environment where I also can be supported and allied with for the challenges I might face being a person of color? If you want your work environment and the world in general to be a better place, so to speak, i.e. you want there to be more fairness, more of a level playing field, more opportunity for everyone, then you should be an ally to whoever you see around you that is in a marginalized position. You should use your privilege for good.
That was the voice of Safwan Javed, an entertainment lawyer and drummer of one of my favorite bands, Wide Mouth Mason. And that was definitely a highlight for me, was getting to go talk to him in his mum's house back in August. Beth and Brea, what do you think we all need to do as we move towards allyship?
His last line has stuck with me throughout the entire season of use your privilege for good.
And I think that's good advice. And I think one of the things you can do is not stop thinking of it as some kind of major project. That is, I think you just need to be start by looking out for the small things that happen every day that make it difficult for people and create barriers for people, and call those out and start doing that. I mean, you can certainly become someone who takes up a lot of responsibility for supporting other people and providing allyship in a more extensive way. But I think most people certainly are in situations where they can make a difference just by drawing attention to things that are creating inequities.
Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be like a big performative thing, but just notice, just clue in to the realities that other people are facing.
Or like Prasanna said on episode 3, when he said being an accomplice or an ally is a condition of being his friend, is part of being a friend and part of a friendship. And there's power in that as well. Just being a good friend to people, being there for them and having their backs, I think, is also very, very important.
So on the podcast over the season, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about allyship, as we were just reminding ourselves. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about being true to yourself. So I'd like to ask Brea and Leah, what have been your favorite moments from the season?
Well, amongst many things, hearing Leah have such a special moment interviewing Soraya.
I was so excited. I was extremely excited.
I love that moment so much. But in complete seriousness, there were so many amazing moments. Being part of this podcast and book production has been one of the most meaningful things I've been part of. And for me, my favorite moments were hearing the impact that the book and the podcast have had. Hearing from our colleague Judy, a well-being coordinator featured in our last episode, that she frequently references the podcast and book in her appointments with students and law faculty and staff. Hearing Courtney in episode 3 talk about the positive impact her letter had on relationships with colleagues. Hearing from a colleague a province over who used the book during judicial training. And last but not least, having an opportunity to hear Beth reflect on her own career and her relationship with the law, the Dear Beth moments.
I like the Dear Beth moments. They're usually pretty good.
Some of my favorite moments, this isn't necessarily a moment, but a theme, was the generosity of our guests that we've had and the time that they have given to us and their wisdom and insight that they have shared with us. And people have had some very vulnerable conversations on this podcast and shared some vulnerable stuff and ideas. I also really appreciated getting to hang out with Safwan, like I said, with him and his mom, and chatting with Soraya. And something else that I wanted to mention that was one of my favorite things was watching you, Jen, and Farah just be so excellent at your work. Like, I've talked about you two a lot to a lot of people, where I've said one of my favorite things about this podcast has been watching these two women just kill it. Just knock it out. Like, it's so amazing to me, like what you've been able to pull together with the scripts. And then I watch you host, and it's just watching people do things at an excellent level is fun. And it's been inspiring to watch. So shout out to you two on that. It's been awesome.
I can see Farah blushing through the glass. We're going to have to talk about her lots. Farah is our producer. She's the one who makes this whole thing happen.
It's just been incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I think about it, one of my favorite moments had to be when we brought in students who are living this right now.
Yeah.
Like, that made it so real for me because I've never been to law school. I'm like the only non-lawyer here. And just hearing in such a raw way, like how things are going for them today in 2024, when you'd think we're supposed to be so advanced, we're supposed to know so much better in so many fronts, and yet real life confronts you at every turn. And the way those gals expressed it was amazing. Okay, Beth, your standout moments?
So this is like asking you who's your favorite child or who's your favorite student. And that's very difficult because there have been a lot of things that have resonated and been quite memorable and delightful, and I have really enjoyed a lot of things about the podcast, including the generosity of all our guests. But I guess there are two things that I wanted to mention. One is the in the first episode that we did, some of the things that Adrienne Forgeron said about shaping your own life. And I think that message, particularly for students and young lawyers, the idea that you're not just a piece of flotsam who's kind of floating along on the wave, you can actually make decisions about your own life and decide what you would prefer to do and how you would prefer to live your life, how you would prefer to practice law. And I think that's a very inspirational sort of message, and I'm glad that she sort of brought that out. The other one, of course, speaking of fangirls, was the interview that I did with Justice Abella,
Yes.
which, was really great fun for me. But I think a lot of the things she talked about, now nobody can realistically hope, I think, to have the kind of impact that she has had as a single person on Canadian society. But I think nonetheless, her message that if you get involved in advocacy, if you go and support the causes that are important to you and speak up for the issues that are important to you, that's what brings about social change, is a lot of people doing that. And I think sort of saying to lawyers, you have skills at this, you have views on things, you are articulate people, so get out there and pursue whatever cause it is that's of interest to you. And I think that was a really important message.
Yeah. Speak up, show up, actually mean something with your words. It's such a beautiful tone for this podcast. And I think about even the book that got us all started and how initially it was women. Sometimes they were writing letters to their children. Sometimes they were writing letters to themselves. Okay, I'm going to give you a same very quick little assignment. If you were to write a letter to your younger self, what would you say?
Despite asking people to do this for the book, I never did it. I never did what we asked people to do. I don't know if Beth and Brea ever did the same thing after we... No, they're shaking their heads.
You know
so
what?
No.
I think I've seen this out on like social media as like a challenge. Like in 10 words or less, what is the message you leave to your younger self? Or what is something you would tell yourself in the past? And most of the things in life I'm pretty okay with, but yeah, there's always something. Okay, so what do you got?
Well, I was thinking about it, and I would write to Leah on the night of she's about to turn 13. And I have a copy of my journal from back then, and I wrote to myself, and I was 12. I said, I'm turning 13 tomorrow. I thought I would have accomplished more by now. And
lady.
I know, I would write to 12-year-old Leah, and I would say, I love your ambition, and I love your sense of purpose and your sense of responsibility to those around you, but I want you to know that your worth is not tied to your accomplishments, and you don't need to achieve things in order to be loved and be okay. That's what I would say. I would say you don't need to be a good girl all the time. You need to grow to that faster than you're going to. If you can, you're the oldest daughter, but you're actually not responsible for everyone's feelings around you. You don't have to take care of everyone. You don't need to feel guilty all the time. You aren't responsible for how other people might treat you, but you can take some responsibility in drawing boundaries. It's okay to take up space. It's okay to use your voice. And it's okay to settle into your life later, and you don't constantly have to be reaching out for the next achievement. I would give her a heads up and say you're going to go through some hard stuff in the years ahead, but you've already been through some. You know you're capable, you know you're competent, and you know you're strong, and you'll be okay. And you have so much to look forward to. And I would end my letter to myself by saying it's going to be okay. It is okay to feel angry, and you're going to feel angry. And then I would have included this quote from Rage Becomes Her by Soraya Chemaly. Anger is the expression of hope. It is a statement of need, an insistence of acknowledgement. Anger is a boundary. Anger is boundless. An opportunity for contemplation and self-awareness. It is commitment, empathy, self-love, social responsibility. If it is poison, it is also the antidote. The anger we have as women is an act of radical imagination. Angry women burn brighter than the sun.
Little Leah had the same oldest daughter syndrome that I think I did. Anybody else here an oldest? Oh, Beth has her hand up. She's also an oldest daughter. Yep. Kind of tell. It's on our faces.
Exactly.
But I thought I would have accomplished more by now, the day before you turned 13.
I know. I read that when I was in my 30s, and I was just like, oh, Leah. And every birthday, until I was around 35, every birthday I felt this sense of dread. I didn't like my birthdays because I was always a time where I would take stock and I would say, you haven't really done enough. And then by the time I was about 35, I kind of stopped with that. And I was like, you're okay. You've done a lot. Your birthdays are something to celebrate. And then being comfortable with the idea of settling into your life, which doesn't mean settling.
Yes.
But settling into your life and just being okay with where you are. And that happened for me at 35. So I would have given her a heads up that at 35, you're going to have 2 little girls and things are going to shift for you in your perspective as you think about how you want to mother your children.
Yeah, kids, hey, ooh, they're a big shift.
They are.
Okay, who's going for actual oldest daughter, or you're not?
I'm the baby. No,
okay.
yeah.
But you're the only daughter.
I am the only daughter.
You're responsible.
Jeez, I'll take a minute to wipe the tears off my eyes after hearing that. I would take creative agency here and write a letter to my older self and remind myself, to put it bluntly, to not be ageist, especially towards younger women. So in episode 2, Brooke spoke about some hard moments of put downs from other women. And I've reflected on just some of the more subtle, maybe not so much put downs, but how ageism can impact how women do or do not advance in their careers. I currently teach a course that puts the youth of the legal profession at the front of justice system change. So I'd remind my older self of this incredible teaching experience and to continue to listen carefully and curiously to those who are of a younger vintage, that they truly bring so much to the table. I hope my older self emulates a mentoring role in the spirit that women like Beth has for me, that is taking an interest in and supporting law students and new lawyers with confidence and grace.
I can tell you're the youngest in that you had to flip the whole assignment. Okay. I'm going back to that oldest daughter here for the last word.
That's right.
I do like that.
Right.
I like that. It does make me think about all the times that I've looked and gone, oh, you haven't been through any young yet. Don't even worry about that, sweetie. But it's easy to do. Yeah. I like that you've got that on my radar now, but I want to hear, what would you put in a letter to whoever it's going to?
Yes. Well, I'll follow the rules. Oldest daughter, follow the rules. So I would say to my younger self, lighten up, that you will actually be good at some things, that you will kind of learn some things, that you will have opportunities that you're not thinking of now, that you will be able to take up, and that you will be able to perform satisfactorily in those roles. And I think oldest daughter, I was very serious.
We all are. And you have to be. You're the...
And sure that I had to follow a straight path and that, I had to figure it out. And I would say, take what comes and take what opportunities present themselves and enjoy them.
Enjoy them. That's actually, the more that I think about it, I wish my younger self could just sort of look around her sometimes a little bit more and take it in at the moment where things were happening, rather than trying, okay, and what has to happen next? And who do I need to make sure is okay? There's so much of that people pleasing that went on for I don't know how many years, but eventually when I had more children than adults in my house, that all stopped. We just went into survival mode.
I would also say, and this is, of course, I'm at a different stage with parenthood than you are, but, that all of the sort of guilt that I felt when I went to law school when my children were 2 and 6, and so they were pretty young when I was sort of starting my career. And I had a very long period where I just felt I was good at neither my career nor parenthood, that I didn't have enough time for either, and that I was shortchanging both the people I worked with and my children. And they've turned out all right. So I think I would say, let up on yourself. You have to figure it out. I mean, you have to figure out how to balance your life somehow, but don't beat yourself up if you're not quite.
If the tablecloths aren't ironed.
If the tablecloths aren't ironed, right.
I keep thinking about Justice Hollins and how she said, yeah, I didn't have the guilt. And I'm like, wow, to be doing that. And she had those twins that she was going through so much of her early legal career with. Okay, ditch the guilt. It serves no one, and especially not you or the people you care about. That I can do. Okay, well, it has been amazing sharing the studio with you. I think it was, in terms of all the podcasts I've ever been involved with, this one was for sure the most enlightening, interesting, amazing. If you haven't listened to the full season, if somehow you got to this point in this episode, go back and it's okay. You don't have to even listen to them in order. But if you have a question for us, if you may want to pitch us on future episodes, we do have an email. It's createjustice, all one word, createjustice@usask.ca, and hopefully we'll come back and we'll have a whole new slate of episodes and even cooler guests. So I'm Jen Cannell. I've been joined in the studio here by Brea Lowenberger, by Leah Howie, by Beth Bilson. These are the co-editors of Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law, and you can buy that at the University of Regina Press. So thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank
Good
you.
night. That's it for this episode of Dear Beth. We record and produce this podcast on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations. It's also the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to our First Nations and Métis ancestors, and we are grateful to be able to have these conversations and to be able to hear these stories on Treaty 6 territory. We do this while we're recognizing our own privilege, and we're mindful of how we can use this podcast to make sure diverse voices get a platform. We draw inspiration from Maria Campbell's observation that stories are a way that we can talk to each other without having barriers between us. Our team at Dear Beth is Leah Howie, Brea Lowenberger, and Beth Bilson. Hannah Jorgensen's our associate producer, and Wayne Giesbrecht is our tech. We produce this podcast in partnership with the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. Dear Beth is a production of Cascade Communications. I'm Jen Cannell. Thanks for listening.